r/AskReddit. What is your I survived story? I am a flight instructor. The first 500 hours of flight is called the killing zone. However, many flight instructors are hired right out of flight school, 190 hours to 250 hours depending on the path. I had maybe 200 hours at the time. I flew into a small dark cloud that was obviously a thunderstorm. Completely dumb thing to do. Within seconds, ice built up on my wings and propeller. Next thing I knew, I was falling out of the sky. Wings with ice on them no longer fly. Nor did my propeller offer any power. My attitude indicator had tumbled. I had no idea of attitude. And my turn coordinator was beyond standard rate turn. Altimeter was circling fast. Like 500 feet per second. We broke out of the clouds maybe 500 feet above the ground. Nose down. And I was able to recover within 100 feet of crashing into the ground. I was training Chinese students at the time. And after that, they were scared of any weather. December 1979. Cincinnati, Ohio. The Who concert. Myself and my friends were in the front waiting for the doors to open. In the background you could hear music playing. The crowd behind us started to rush to the door. I was literally picked up off of my feet. I'm in the air about 3 feet off the ground wedged between two bigger guys when my left leg got caught on the handrails spreading me apart. I yelled once the pain became too much and a guy behind me lifted my leg over freeing me. Once inside the arena we settled down and smoked a joint. Then, when I went to relieve myself is when I saw the bodies covered up in sheets. Very thankful I was in front and not the middle. That concert is the reason we now have reserved seating versus festival seating. Got into a huge fight with my ex, resulting in him taking an industrial sized zip tie and tightening it around my neck. Felt my eyes start to bulge out and the blood vessels in my face pop. I stumbled to grab a pair of scissors to cut it off. The problem was that it was so tight I had to gouge my neck with the scissors to get it off. I was horribly disfigured for weeks. And kids would stare or run away from me when I was in public. I had a panic attack at a lake and completely forgot how to breathe and swim. Bear Grylls' survival's technique on remaining calm and the importance of breathing helped me calm down and get enough air to yell for help. I fucking hated that experience. I really could have done without it. I had a 14-hour surgery to remove an almost 4 cm brain tumor 4 months ago. The weeks leading up to the surgery were the scariest and most stressful times of my life. But here I am. Alive. No real lasting side effects, despite my docs saying I could experience everything from permanent tinnitus to excruciating headaches to facial paralysis. I'm back to work walking 12 miles per day on my mail route and currently getting snuggles from my 4-year-old son. Life isn't good, it's amazing. Someone stabbed me in the back when I was walking in the streets. He actually wasn't trying to stab me but to slice me and try to steal me, but he failed, and as he had failed he ran away and I was there with a knife on my back and a problem to solve. But as someone saw it all, we called the paramedics, who actually told me I was lucky cause the robber had almost pierced my spine and actually sliced a little bit of a lung in the way. I was 5 years old at the time. My dad was walking me to kindergarten. As we both crossed the street, that's when I got hit. The next thing I remember was me being under the car. After that we headed home. When I was 2, almost 3, my parents were at a wedding and my cousin, 15, was babysitting us. I have no idea if my parents had approved or anything. But we were jumping from the inside windowsill onto a mattress on my bedroom floor. We were living in a 2-story house. The windows were open. Little Isla in her infinite wisdom took a step back too far. And because I was small enough I could fit fully through the window, I fell the 2 stories and landed headfirst on concrete. My cousin asked my siblings where I had gone. And my sister, who was 4, replied that I had fallen out of the window. My cousin of course didn't believe her. But after some coaxing looked out the window to see my unconscious on the ground. Surprisingly, I didn't suffer from any real injuries. I had concussion from the fall. And apparently when I landed directly onto my left eye, so I had a badass blackie. The only lasting effect from the fall is now the fact that my skull is crooked. and so my isn't level. Not that noticeable in day-to-day life, but incredibly visible when you look at me in the mirror. First got drunk at age 17 and spent literally the next 20 years as an alcoholic with varying degrees of functionality. Got sober at age 37 with my family and career intact. I survived. Had minor surgery. Was prescribed pain meds but not told the brand name of the meds upon discharge from hospital. Got my period and it was extremely heavy and would not stop after 10 days. Went to urgent care. Passed out in lobby and found out my iron level was so low I had an extreme case of blood loss anemia. Had to get 2 blood transfusions and spend a few days in hospital. Turned out they had given me Aleve, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug and not supposed to be combined with Eliquis, blood thinner, which I was also on. DRS didn't understand how I had still been walking around before I passed out. Piston seized on my motorbike traveling up the M6 in the UK. I remember flying over the handlebars, hitting the road and looking backwards at 3 lanes of traffic coming toward me. I was lucky. A couple of broken bones and the tire imprint of a Volkswagen Beetle from hip to shoulder. Still gives me panic attacks. I was swimming and got caught in an underwater cave tunnel. Had no clue where I was in relation to the entrance or exit. Zero visibility. And no way I was getting out. My buddy luckily saw me struggling and somehow dragged me out just in time. 5 years ago and I still get heart palpitations when I think about it. Liver failed at 17. Was listed for transplant and waited 2 years on the list. Was circling the drain. They decided to try a Hail Mary transplant with a living donor, thinking it would probably fail and in turn get me to the top of the deceased donor list. My aunt was willing to donate to me as she was a blood match. Luckily for me, my surgeons were able to make the living donor transplant work, and there was no need for a secondary. Coming up on my 10th liverversary in September. My aunt and I are both doing great. I lived throughout all of 2012 without dying. I got stabbed for no reason by a gang in a bad part of town when I was 17. Cornered me in a dockyard by a bridge and said they were gonna kill me and throw me in the water. Kicked and sliced me and ripped the clothes off. Managed to climb a chain link fence and run off before getting a much larger knife put in me by someone who was in the process of charging at me with it. Got pics if this picks up any steam. Drove an ATV through a barbed wire fence at 50 miles per hour. Luckily the fence was rusty and dilapidated. The wire rolled up my neck instead of decapitating. Basically severe rope burn. When I was 7, my parents started dating this guy. He was a textbook abuser. To put it short. To cut the chase. One night in 2012 he got drunk as fuck and got a knife. He started screaming and stuff. Saying stuff about how he's gonna kill my parent and I. How he's gonna leave me with her corpse and stuff. The neighbors heard. And somehow managed to get in and keep him locked in the living room. He stabbed the door numerous times. Anyway. We managed to get out and stayed at my parents' friend's house while the police was called. That's pretty much the only thing I remember. Aside from the fact that that day was also the first time I had experienced a panic attack. It feels weird. If the neighbor hadn't heard him or hadn't managed to keep him locked in there, I'd have been dead. I grew up in rural Iowa. One night I was driving into town on the gravel roads and a deer ran out in front of me. I did exactly what I shouldn't have done. Swerved to avoid it. I lost control of the car. Went down in the ditch and basically drove up a tree. The car ended up upside down. And the driver's side window and windshield shattered. As the car was swaying back and forth. My head tilted out the window slightly. The weight of the car caused the right side of my head to press up against the broken glass around what was left of the window, severing half of my ear. I managed to find my phone. Dialed 911. Ended up in the hospital. And picked glass out of my scalp for a couple days. After spending a year drinking myself to sleep by crying, I blacked out and my subconscious told my fraternity brothers about the rope I'd bought for myself. Been about 5ish years and I'm still here. They helped a lot. Cancer survivor. Blessed every day I wake up. I spilled boiling water on my lap while I was camping in the middle of nowhere. I had severe burns covering 30% of my body and had no cell service, nor could I find the keys to my car. My boyfriend at the time found a park ranger who then radioed for an ambulance. It took nearly an hour for the ambulance to show up and another hour to reach the hospital. I was going into shock while waiting for the ambulance, and a very nice woman managed to keep me awake until the ambulance arrived. I was in the hospital for 4 days in the ICU before being discharged. I had skin grafts and the burns took nearly a year to fully heal. I still don't like to strain pasta or carry hot pans for fear of burns. I was born with an omphalocele. Basically, when I was in my mom's belly and my body and my intestine formed, something messed up and my body ended up next to my guts instead of around them. This was totally unexpected and I was born kind of inside out. The surgeons worked for 12 hours to put everything back inside and make me survive. The only consequence is that I have no belly button. My nephew fell in a really deep river and I jumped in after him without thinking. I'm a good swimmer, but I am also partially blind and was in heavy clothing, not a bathing suit. So, there were a lot of problems navigating and sinking. I managed to get out with him though. His dumb bitch of a mother didn't even care when my mom told her what had happened. Just continued playing on her phone and said, "Oh, thanks." My brother put a towel around me and the kiddo and drove to my house to fetch me a change of clothes and the kiddo some clothes from his car though. So that was appreciated. When I was younger, about 10 years old, I fell out with a kid and he ended up pushing me from behind into traffic. Luckily the bus driver had quick reactions and hit the brakes hard. Ended up stopping a fair distance from me in retrospect, but as a kid that shit traumatized the fuck out of me and I still feel really uncomfortable when people go behind me. Incorporated family. Last time I drank in 2016 I had a blood alcohol content of 0.453%. When I was 7, I visited my grandparents. They had a dog this time and I petted him before I wanted to go to bed. He has always been a bit aggressive and so it came that he suddenly jumped on me and bit my arm very hard. He barely let go of it. I didn't feel any pain at this point. Probably from shock. That's why I thought everything was fine. I didn't see the wound. I wore a thick pullover and I wanted to go to bed. But my mom heard the sound of his growling and came up to me to ask if everything was fine. I just pointed on my arm and she pulled me with her to check. Turned out my arm was almost ripped off and I could have bled out if I just went to bed like I wanted to. So thank you mom for noticing. My dad accidentally poisoned me and 15 other Boy Scouts on a survival campout when he fed us what turned out to be tung oil nuts. A very poisonous nut snuck into Florida from China. I was the one who got the worst of it and had to stay in intensive care in a hospital for several days. I survived. I was nearly killed by my dentist. There was equal bits negligent administration of Valium, a heavy sedative, and equal parts not really giving a shit. They messed up and gave me over triple the dose I should have had. And then some Benadryl on top of that when I had my wisdom teeth removed. I was unconscious and apparently when overdosing on sedatives eventually your brain stops telling your lungs to work. So then there was a rush to get my wisdom teeth out before they would actually do something about the fact I wasn't breathing on my own. So they jammed a drill into my jaw so hard it cut a nerve. Side of my nose still goes numb. Once they actually got the breathing thing under control, being intubated sucks when you wake up. Imagine the worst strep throat of your life. I woke up like 3 days later. Would have sued but the practice went out of business very quickly afterwards. One time, I was swimming at my friend's place. I started playing in the shallow end, but I accidentally drifted into the deep end. I don't know how to swim, so I was trying frantically to get to the edge. I yelled for help but the guys watching us didn't care. There were several of my friends nearby, but none of them cared. There was nothing to grab onto, and my head was 100% submerged. I half walked, half tried to swim to the edge. I couldn't get to air and I thought about just accepting my fate and dying. Finally, I reached the edge. I just slowly pulled myself out and went back to the shallow end. But I'll never forget how terrified I was. I couldn't even think then, because I panicked. I'm very afraid of deep water now. When I was like 11 I was playing in my bike with a bunch of friends. At that time in me hometown there was this field where cows and horses were all chill that was owned by an elder couple. Well, I was biking at full speed and I brake just before hitting a horse, pregnant, that was way off the field and into the street. I guess she panicked and starts chasing me. I fucking panicked. Tried to get away but I fell sideways on the grass facing the sky and the horse just jumped me. His back legs landed inches of my head. I remember the shake in my entire body and seeing his belly. I was fucking pale and went home. Tell my fathers and they were in shock too. It took me a long time to not fear horses anymore. Back in 2012, I was driving my friend and I to go get some food. We were sitting at a stoplight, first car, and I can remember looking out the side window then hearing my friend scream. I turned back just in time to see a semi-wrecker hit us head on. Turns out the guy wasn't paying attention at the opposite end of the intersection, which stopped at the bottom of a hill. So he was going at decent speed. There were no brake marks either. His semi pushed my car back into 3 other cars and a moped before landing on top of my car. One wheel going through the ceiling down the middle console. So barely missing mine and my friend's head. Most of the other people involved walked away with minor enough injuries. My friend had some stitches and a lot of bruising. The man on the moped had toes amputated and had to be taken to the hospital for internal injuries. I was taken to a hospital for broken ribs, collapsed lung, and a brachial spelling plexus on my arm. Nerve function was not working so I couldn't use my arm shoulder fully for almost a year. Still hate semis. Not me but my aunt. She lives in a small rural town in the middle of some hills covered by the woods. She was carrying some leaves in a wheelbarrow. She usually just throws them over the cliff, which goes down 100 or 200 meters into the woods below. Well, the wheelbarrow fell off and got caught in some tree branches. She wanted to retrieve the damn thing on her own and tried to reach it, but she lost her footing and fell down. Somehow she grabbed a branch and stopped her descent and climbed back up. Not exactly an exciting story like the other ones, but that's how my aunt almost killed herself over a wheelbarrow. Basically my whole life, I started having severe mental health problems at the age of 4 and was often mute and nearly catatonic. If I had been born even 15 years earlier I would have been institutionalized. Possible had a lobotomy and suffered all sorts of abuse. My life was headed down a very terrible path where I likely would have died at a young age. But my mom remarried when I was 12 and my dad completely changed my life path. At 13 I attempted suicide by overdose and only survived because I was woken up for school the next day. I wasn't breathing when I was found. So just a few more minutes and I wouldn't be here. I've had some struggles with drugs and alcohol and have nearly aspirated on my own vomit a few times. I still have frequent suicidal ideation and have checked myself into the psych ward 3 times for it. Right now I'm doing alright. I'm in therapy and I'm taking my medications regularly. But I consider every day I have as me surviving. Edit. Spelling grammar. Was out hiking in my woods. Saw a dead tree that looked rotten and ready to fall across the trail. So I gave it a shove so that it would fall away from the trail. It started falling. The trunk shattered on the side. And it was suddenly falling sideways. Hit another tree. Bounced directly back at me. Had just enough time to take a single step to the side as several hundred pounds of tree slammed into the ground right next to me. Enough that I felt the ground shake. Would have squished me like a grape had it hit. Dunno if this counts but my mom and I got into an accident a while ago. We were hit head on by an old man who didn't see us as he was turning onto another road. I just remember being hit and then the airbags went off and my ears popped. Everything went into slow-mo. My mom was shaking me but I couldn't make sense of anything. The car caught on fire and the ambulance came. After, I fell out of the car and people helped me up. Thankfully I was okay and so was my mom. But my shoulders hurt really bad for the next couple of months. Felt like I was in a permanent shoulder shrug. Shit was scary. I stepped on a Lego. But seriously. Going to 6-month checkup as baby me. Car gets T-boned on my door side. Is a write-off. Not only did I survive, I was unharmed and slept through it. So, I've had a heck of a life so far. I've had a drug problem or two. Had guns pulled on me. Been in car accidents. Was told by a doctor I had cancer. It turned out it wasn't. But for about 2 months I was terrified. And I used to live in South Cali's darker neighborhoods. The closest I ever came to death was 2 years ago. I was riding a bicycle, not a motorcycle, and crashed. Sun was in my eyes when the trail turned. Tire went off of the tarmac. Crash. I braced myself with my arms. But for about 30 seconds I thought I landed on my face. I was convinced my nerves were dead and my face was hanging off. I was so badly panicked it took me about 2 minutes to realize that my left arm was visibly broken. With the rest of the stuff I'd been though. It's odd to me that my freaking bike crash is the closest to a I survived story I have. A car once hit me when I was a child. The hit was in the middle of my forehead and the driver ran away. I stood up and started walking home without realizing what just happened. In the middle of the way, I felt warm liquid coming down from my head. I touched it and looked at my hand and said oh blood, and started crying. Somehow one of my neighbors found me and carried me home. I was lying in bed for some hours. I probably passed out since I don't remember this part, until my father came back from work and took me to hospital. To this moment nobody knows why nobody called for ambulance. But anyway I am alive and functioning for now. With a star on my forehead to remind me of that accident. So yeah. I survived I guess. When I was visiting my friends we took a trip to walk around and got hit by heavy rain. We still had fun but I decided to walk ahead of them because we were in the forest and I was young so plenty of energy. At some point I slipped because apparently there was a hill that went down to a creek that I didn't see. The flow of water kept carrying me away and down to the bottom. I tried to swim up and get some air but the flow kept on sinking me. I managed to get to the side and grab onto a steady stick which I used to climb out of the water flow. So here I am still breathing. About 10 years ago there was a storm and flood on our French campground. The tent was flooding. Unsalvageable. Late at night. I was maybe 9. Car parked in front. Mom wanted to quit trying to save the tent and shelter in the car. Dad wanted to keep going. Trying to save small bits of our stuff floating around. Mom had had enough after a few minutes longer in the freezing water and said no I'm gonna sit in the car with me. Mom and I zipped open the tent. Exited. Took one step towards the car parked maybe 5 steps away. Then a massive tree fell over the entire length of the car and crushed it to scrap. Glass flew everywhere. Had my dad not protested and given in to Mom sooner, she and I could have been in the car and could have died. A minute sooner and we would have been smashed to a mixture of metal and body parts. I escaped my abusive stepmom. Y2K. Phew. I was hospitalized when I was 18 with liver failure and sepsis. The doctors later said if my family had brought me to the ER only 30 minutes later, I would have died. It's a bit fucked up to think about since I was feeling sort of fine. Really. I remember trying to eat half a jam sandwich in the car to the ER and puking up every bite. And just kind of thinking oh well. I don't like strawberry that much anyway. Unfortunately I don't really have much of a cool story. But I had C. diff for 2 months. Couldn't eat or drink anything without it almost immediately coming out of mouth or ass afterwards and ended up losing about 20 pounds. Took them 3 different stool tests to finally diagnose me correctly. Why the first 2 didn't pick it up I have no idea. I fell sick for about a week. Couldn't eat or drink anything without it coming back up. Unbearable cramps to the point I couldn't walk. My mom thought it was menstrual things until one night I was vomiting acid and things just stopped. Like everything stopped hurting and I felt a seize come over me. My mom comes in and immediately panics. I guess I was white. And my eyes were lifeless, but I felt so at peace. We rushed to the hospital. They took 9 hours to see me. At this point nurses and doctors kept trying to keep me awake but I just wanted to sleep. They ended putting me under and next thing you know I'm awake. And I woke up screaming. They said it was impossible for me to have made it as far as I did. This was 11 years ago. It was my appendix. It had ruptured the final night when things felt peaceful. And I was experiencing sepsis at that point. When I was younger I had gotten the flu and a few days later I had extreme difficulty breathing, so my mom took me to the hospital. There I found out that I was having a severe asthma attack and was on a ventilator aka a respirator till the next morning because I wasn't able to breathe on my own due to the large amount of mucus that was blocking my airway. Long story short, I lived. This is majorly online, but it's really the only way I can talk to people. A group of friends backstabbed me, spread lies about me, and when I came to settle things, they proceeded to drive me to the verge of suicide. They took everything I had, including my best friend. I'd never felt such despair. But it's not over till it's over, and I can say I'm really a better person for living through all that. High school and depression mixed in with severe anxiety. That's it. That's the whole story. Got hammed with my father in a stoop of depression. He wanted me to go grab some broccoli from the grocery store, albeit knowing I was hammered. I decided to head to my mom's house that was just down some back roads and steal some from her fridge. She's a food hoarder. Well, an everything hoarder, so I don't feel so bad stealing something from her 10 refrigerators. While driving I decided I was going to try to be a race car driver in a Kia Rio. Needless to say, that didn't go over too well. Hammered, I ended up slamming into a tree going about 60 miles per hour. My head went through the windshield, but I was saved by the engine being pushed into the driver's seat, making my foot effectively work as an anchor, preventing me from being launched from the car. I somehow made it out of the car and collapsed in the road with a concussion and a broken foot. A neighbor found me lying in the middle of the road after hearing a huge boom. I learned my lesson and never drank and drove again. Now I have a loving girlfriend and an 11-month-old little girl that my stupid decisions could have deprived me of. I'm a highly unlucky person. Probably because I used all my luck up with my I survived story. After I was certified as a PADI diver I booked a trip. I was on a live aboard on the Great Barrier Reef. Another diver and I, also new, were following a ridge of coral and we realized we were a little deeper than planned. We were at 70 feet depth. Not critical but still deeper than planned. We signaled that we should start heading up and back to the boat. I checked my air and the gauge indicated 1/2 a tank. I signaled my buddy and she indicated 1/2 a tank. We started back and not 3 minutes mutes and my regulator started drawing hard. Really hard. I looked at my gauge and it read no air. 0. It's amazing how fast things run through your mind. First thought, I'm 5,000 miles from home, 70 feet from the surface and out of air. I'm gonna die. Next thought was I can rocket to the surface. Likely hurt myself but I'll be alive. Next thought, my buddy has air, grab the alternate and go up. The latter is what I did. I'm alive. Obviously, and still diving. I learned a lot early on and have gone on to record over 300 dives around the world. I crashed into a moose when I was driving to visit my girlfriend a few years ago. I'm driving along the highway at night. About 3 hours into an 8-hour drive, I noticed something on the side of the road. So I slow down a bit. Suddenly this moose charges out from the ditch. I smash into its head with my car and I start spinning out. While this is happening, my mind is filling with stories about how moose accidents rarely end well. So naturally, I start freaking out. Thankfully, since it was pretty late into the night, there wasn't any traffic. Somehow, I managed to stop spinning out and managed to park neatly on the side of the highway. Even crazier, the only thing that happened to me was whiplash. And I even managed to drive my car to my intended destination. I survived an abusive alcoholic dad and a druggie of a mom for the first 12 years of my life. Hey, I'm still here and those two are hell of a lot better too. So all in all, gotta go through some bad to get to the good. I was at intensive care for 11 days after a severe surgery. They fucked up my painkiller scheme and practically overdosed me every day. I was getting too many pills for my weight. Because I was often barely conscious, I didn't eat enough, causing me to lose weight fast, which made the problem even worse. It ended with the doctor getting rid of all the pills all of a sudden, which led to a delirium tremens. I was seeing shadows coming out of the wall etc and was convinced the nurses wanted to kill me lol. I've never been so scared in my entire life. The day after one of the nurses told my parents I had cried for 8 hours straight that night. I can't really recall that, but I still recall how I legit thought I was gonna die there. I survived living with a narcissistic idiot, my sister. You know those fair rides where it's like a roller coaster but the track is just a circle? And like after you go around the circle a few times it holds everyone upside down in the air. Well, they have gates at the top of the seats just in case someone let go or fell out of the seat they wouldn't fall to their death. Well, the door to the gate above my seat was open, and when I realized, I almost started to cry because at that point I was holding on for dear life, and if I had let go while we were upside down I would have fallen to my death for sure. I broke my neck while swimming alone. I was so lucky I didn't even have nerve damage. Appendix ruptured when I was 16 and all the content of it and the shit inside me filled up inside my abdomen. The doctors literally had to put a garden hose into me and flush me out for 2 hours. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at 11. Primary sclerosing cholangitis, liver disease causing inflammation and scarring of the bile ducts, at 12. Liver failure and 8 months on waitlist before liver transplant at 13. Today I'm a somewhat healthy, still suffering from UC, 21-year-old. Not nearly as crazy as some of the other stories on here. But I survived being thrown from a horse. We came up to a jump. And he decided not to go over it. I went over without him. I landed on my ass on the other side of the jump with the wind knocked out of me. I didn't feel anything other than sore. Got up. Made sure everything worked and got back in the saddle. 2 hours later I started to feel pain in my lower back. A trip to the ER and some x-rays later found out I had broken my tailbone clean in two. It took 6 months to be able to walk, sit, or lay down without pain. Was trying to make a big rock in the edge of a cliff fall by jumping on it. Yeah, not very smart of us. Short story. I ended up falling with the rock. The lucky thing is we knew we were retarded, so I tied myself to some rock which let me climb. Had 2 kids. They can finally wipe their own asses, brush their own teeth, and get to bed all and sleep through the night all on their own. It was a very physically exhausting period of time. Ate a highway at 110 miles per hour when I flipped my car drunk and high on blow. Seat belts. Wear them. OHH. Don't drink and drive either, or don't drink and drive while on a coke bender without wearing a belt. Local paper ran a full-page story on how local man dies twice in accident, but miraculously survived. It's easy. Be high as fuck and drunk and you'll limber as a rag doll. The 18th of August, 1994. When I was 4 years old I had WPW syndrome. Google it if you don't know what it is. It's heart disease. We live in Georgia, country in Caucasus. So back in that time medicine was not that good. So we had to travel to Berlin to get ablation. Unfortunately, my family didn't have enough money to pay for the ablation. So DHZB hospital helped us. Thank you, Dr. Ovratsky, for everything you have done for me and my family. Without you I wouldn't be there. Writing this reply. Saw a river. Decided to swim in it. Got stuck in large currents. Got stuck underwater. Barely made it alive. Lesson of the story. Don't swim in rivers with large currents. I was riding my bicycle in Nick high on amphetamines, clean and sober for 3 years now, and for whatever reason decided to abruptly turn left. Across traffic without looking. I ended up hitting the right front wheel of a lorry. Had I turned a second earlier I would have been a slab of flesh and bones to be scraped off the road by paramedics. Luckily it didn't turn out that way. For a couple years afterwards I had, not what I would term flashbacks, but something similar where my mind would go back to the moment. Think about how close I was to death and freak out a little. My friend's mom tried to beat a train in a Ford Explorer. The train slammed into the front left of the SUV. And we went spiraling off into a ditch. All I could smell was gasoline. And I knew our time was short. I opened the center console, grabbed the seatbelt cutter, and cut us all free. I used the blunt end of the cutter to break the glass, no percussion point, and crawled out, followed by everyone else. Since engine block took most of the damage, we were all pretty much fine. Turns out the reason I smelled gas is because of a big ass rock punctured the gas tank. So yeah. Came pretty close to dying. And never rode with her mom driving ever again. Could have been much worse. This happened to me and my wife 2 weeks ago. We're on my motorcycle, wearing helmets, stopped with our signal on and displaying hand signals to turn left into our neighborhood. We had sat there for about 10 seconds when an SUV, driver texting, plowed through us at 55 miles per hour. Spent a week in the hospital and another week in rehab. I'm tied to a walker and the wife is wheelchair bound and will be for some time. It's amazing to consider how we survived. Very thankful to be here. We're finally home and it's going to be a long road. Luckily I work from home. Slipped and fell backwards while on a hiking trail and slid 30 odd feet to hit a large boulder at the bottom of the trail. Other side of the boulder, a few 100-foot drop. If you want to get nothing in return, you can like and join my Discord. There is a link in the description.